please fight. It's worth the fight. I've been in the pit. It's a horrible place to live. Learning to get out of it and fighting. I mean, get professional help. I take medication that helps me. Get whatever help you need to fight your way out of the pit, because living in joy for the moment is wonderful for you, but it's also wonderful for everybody you come in contact with.
This podcast represents the opinions of our hosts and guests. The content here should not be taken as medical advice and is for informational purposes only. This podcast also does not establish a standard of care, doctor-patient, or client relationship. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast or website. And because each person is so unique, all listeners are encouraged to connect with counseling and medical professionals for assistance with their personal journey. All people, places, and scenarios mentioned in the podcast have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved.
Welcome to We're Not Fine. I'm Dr. Talia Jackson.
And I'm Doug Jensen. We thank you for listening every week to our deep and thought-provoking conversations about relationships.
Welcome. Oh, we should probably introduce ourselves. I'm Dr. Talia Jackson, and this handsome young man over here
is Doug Jensen. I think some of you know me.
This is the beautiful Dr. Kimberly Harms, and she is here to talk about finding your way again, finding your way back to yourself after catastrophic loss. And I have to read your bio and it does start with, she's been around the block in life, and you'll see why. Like, this is a true Renaissance woman. She has served as a commissioned officer in the United States Public Health Service, a dental school professor, a grief counselor, a death doula, a civil mediator, a clinical dentist with her late husband, Jim, in Farmington, Minnesota, a school board chair, president of an international women's organization, the first woman president of the Minnesota Dental Association, a national spokesperson for the American Dental Association for 21 years, an award-winning, best-selling author, which we're going to talk about your books throughout and at the end. There's another one coming out. She'll tell us all about it. And international speaker on the topics of grief, conflict, and legacy planning. She also has suffered many personal losses, including the deaths by suicide of her mother and her son, and the death by a broken heart of her husband after their son's death. Her most important role now is mother to her 2 surviving children and grandmother to 6 precious grandchildren. Welcome, Kim.
Yeah, welcome, Kim, and welcome everybody as well. And you just saw your grandchildren?
Yes.
This morning.
Yes, this morning.
Before you left from Kansas City.
Kansas City, yes. You do whatever. You have grandkids. There's that limited time when you're really super important, right? So these are 12-year-old twins, and we're celebrating their birthday in Kansas City, so I had to be there because you got to be there, right?
You got to be there,
and
even
I had a ball.
They want to be doing something else sometimes.
Absolutely.
We're so excited to have you here today about this very, very important topic. You know, grief has been something that I've studied. My graduate thesis was about the use of ritual in the grieving process for persons living with HIV and dying of AIDS. Yes. And so it's a really complicated topic from the perspective of this overload that you had of so many losses going on. And I think that's going to kind of be the focus. As you and I have discussed as well, a lot of people don't talk about this. Right. This is a taboo topic, especially dying by suicide is a very hard for people to even comment on as you experience that loss. So we're very interested in hearing your story. And I know there's people in the audience who can associate with some complex losses as well. So we would love to just have you tell your story in any words that you'd like. Okay. And by the way, I'm just calling her the Baywatch person as the wind is blowing at her hair.
I was thinking Marilyn Monroe.
Right. There's a little something going on.
I'm holding this down.
I'm liking
so
it.
This is, we're not going to let that go up. Not a good sight when you're 68, really, let me tell you. So, yes. Okay. So, but, well, I think that I'll start with the suicide deaths, which was the darkest parts of my life. I lost my mother was bipolar, and when she was pregnant with me, she was driving. My dad was in the Navy, and he was going from the East Coast to Fort Ord, California, to the Naval Postgraduate School there, and they stopped at her hometown of Cincinnati, Ohio, And unfortunately, at that hometown, they were testing a drug that was never released in the United States. It was released in Europe called thalidomide. And she was pregnant with me. And it was supposed to be a new way to prevent morning sickness. And when I was born, I was missing some fingers. And it was very hard for her. She was a hand model. She's a very beautiful hand model. And it
Wow.
really hurt her. Really was, she struggled with that. And she probably, during that time, her bipolar disease was getting a little bit worse. But she was the best mother ever. I mean, I think we need to realize that mental illness does not prevent you from being a good parent. She was the best mother ever. When I was 6, they found out that thalidomide was causing all the damage in Europe. And my parents had been divorced since I was about 3. And my father, who had just remarried, but forgot to tell his new wife that he had any kids. It's
Oh,
a
my
difficult
goodness.
story. Called my mother and said, Anne, the reason Kim is missing fingers is you took that drug. It's your fault.
Oof.
And at that point, she went into an institution for 3 months. My dad took us home. She came out, said, I want the kids back. He said, no, I bought the bedroom furniture. You can't have them. And then she went in for the rest of her life, and culminating it when I was 17 when she took her own life. But it's just really, again, want to emphasize, she was the best mother ever, because she showed me she loved me. She taught me I could do anything. And I had 6 years with her. And as you know, as psychologists, those attachment years, those first years are so important. And I really believe that my ability to overcome what's happened later was due to the 6 years I had with my mother. Because the other years were not, when you have a stepmother that was not expecting you and didn't think you were there, and all of a sudden she's stuck with 3 kids and is having her first child, that didn't go very well. So I really, really just want to emphasize, you can be mentally ill, and be a great mother. And my
Great
mother
statement.
was really
Thank
important.
you, Kim. Yep.
And so when I was 19, I married my husband, Jim, when I was 19, which my grandkids remind me of, and I say, don't do that. It was a different time. Don't do that. But I was 19, but it worked out really well. 44 years. It worked out well. And I went to dental school with him, and we started practicing dentistry. Everything was going along well. We had 3 kids. I was very active in the community. We had 2 daughters, and our youngest son was Eric. And Eric was a golden child. He was my dad was a rocket scientist. I mean, he actually designed missiles for the Pentagon. He was super, super bright.
Wow.
Not good with relationships, but super, super bright.
Can't have it all.
Can't have it all. And so Eric was super, super bright, but good with relationships. He had a lot of wonderful relationships. He was loved. He went to St. Thomas Academy. He was a band, drum major, band leader in all the plays. He got into theater. And then he was recruited by Columbia University. They were recruiting him. And so he got to Columbia, and he was voted into student government right away, like as a freshman. Like, who does that, right?
Nobody.
Because when he was campaigning, he focused on what he could do, and he would not get involved in negative campaigning. Apparently, there was a lot of negative campaigning. He just wouldn't do it. He just stated what he would do, kept positive, won by a wide margin. And he was studying engineering, but he was also a jazz pianist, very, very talented jazz pianist. So he was in his dream school playing piano in New York at Columbia and studying engineering. So, I mean, what the heck, right? Yeah. And he was in plays. He was a National Merit Scholar, all those wonderful things. And he was in love. He had met his first girlfriend, and he came home from the first semester and was on top of the world, and he made the dean's list in engineering, and he was like, everything was just going his way. But 2 weeks into his second semester, his girlfriend broke up with him. And 45 minutes later, he was gone. He took his life. 45 minutes. When you think about it, it's a 19-year-old brain. They're not very good at managing those things. And he was very impulsive. As a jazz pianist, that impulsivity is a great thing. But when you're going through trauma, it's a terrible thing, especially when your brain isn't quite fully developed. He was only 19. Anyway, we were destroyed. We were like, our whole lives just were shattered. We had many of you have gone through that. You can't eat, you can't drink. You're in the bottom of the grief pit. I was buying curtains for the grief pit because I was never going to come out. You just felt you were never going to get out of there.
Right.
But something happened shortly after we went back to work. My husband and I went back to work, and a cousin of my husband's was outside with him, right? A month or 2 after Eric died, And I was walking out, I'm in the zombie stage. You know how that grief goes. You're in the zombie stage and you're walking and you kind of try to smile, but it's all external. Internal, you're just dead. And he came up to me with his finger wagging. He was wagging, and like, I'm a grieving mother. Don't wag your finger at me, right? I mean,
Right.
He was wagging his finger at me and he said, Kim, don't you ever let your remaining children think that they're not enough.
No.
And it just hit me like a lightning bolt. He had lost his brother at 19. He was down in Blooming Prairie. He was out drinking. He was 19, same age, out drinking, got drunk, passed out. His friends drove him home, put him in front of the house thinking they were doing him a favor, but it was January in Minnesota and he froze to death in his car.
Oh.
His parents could never work through the grief. They could never get through the grief. And so they were, the cousin and his sister felt they lost their parents at the same time they lost their son. And he was telling me, don't you ever do that. And he was like demanding. Now, you really can't say that to people unless you've been through something like that. I mean, nobody else could do that to me, but it hit a chord. Mm-hmm. And it was really probably one of the most significant moments of my life because I realized I had to fight and kick and scream and get my way out of that grief pit, which was a lot of work, took a lot of time, but I did manage to do it and learn how to live just in the moment. And anyone that's been through grief, you're the zombie stage and you have the shroud over you no matter what you do. The goal really is to be able to live in the moment, to be able to find joy in the moment. We have a place for Eric. My son, my husband later died just 4 years ago, really pretty much from a broken heart of losing Eric. And I realized that there are people around me who are affected by my behavior. They're affected by how much I'm grieving. And so I was determined to fight and kick and scrape my way to get out of the grief pit. And now I am. I'm able to live in the moment. I'm able to have joy. I never thought that would ever be a possibility back in the grief pit days. But that really is my story. I think my greatest accomplishment is in my whole life is just fighting my way out of the grief pit and being able to live in the moment and be a grandma to my grandchildren.
Kim, you talk about being in the moment now and able to do that. I am curious as you look back at Eric, how you feel about it today.
Oh, I just love that kid so much.
Clearly, yep.
I just love that kid so much. And I'm a Christian, and so I have beliefs about, the afterlife. And I think I picture him up there with my husband having the greatest adventure of his life, just being up there with my mother and my son and my husband. I want to say just something, too, when we talk about suicide. When my mother died, she was a Catholic, and it was 1970s, and nobody would give her a funeral. So we went to a viewing in a dark funeral home, and there was like shame dripping. It was just dripping with shame. And she was a wonderful woman, loving woman. And the wonderful thing is that after those years, Eric died from the same disease, right? And he went to a Catholic school. The Catholic St. Thomas Academy showed up on a school day in their dress uniforms, packed the church. We go to a very large church. We go to a Baptist church. The Baptists showed up. That church was packed. There were extra rooms all the way around. We addressed suicide at the funeral. I got up and my husband got up and we looked at those boys and they were all crying. We said, don't understand, Eric made a mistake. Don't do this. This is a mistake. He would not do this over again if he had made it through the first hour after the breakup, right? I think that's important too, to address the situation as it is.
Kim, I totally agree.
And our pastor was wonderful. The Catholic priests were there. They were supportive. They said, one of them was dying himself, and he said, I'm going to see Eric in a couple of weeks, and I'm going to give him a big hug for you. And so to know that we are evolving as a society and changing our views is huge, because when you die from suicide and it's treated as shameful, that shame passes on to you. And fortunately, I had a supportive community that didn't do that.
And people really showed up, and I hope that felt like a reparative experience after the shame and nobody giving your mother a funeral.
Yes.
I mean, that's horrible.
Yes. In fact, the St. Thomas Academy boys in their dress uniforms stood up when his casket was being taken down. They stood up and saluted his casket. There were hundreds of boys in dress uniforms saluting their casket, all of them crying. I was crying, but I felt they loved Eric, and it was the biggest gift they could have given to me.
Kim, I got a little stuck on the part, and I want to reiterate something
Yes.
you said. If only he'd have gone through that painful process of knowing that he could have, imagine that loss of a girlfriend, which at that age feels like it's the end of the world, but we all know it's not. We've all gone through these things. And I think every time, regretfully in the course of my practice, I've probably had 6 suicides. And every time that happens, I think, what could I have done differently? What should I have noticed? What cues did I miss? And there are no cues anyone can miss. You didn't miss anything. Your husband didn't miss anything. None of us miss things. I think people feel so much pain at those times. Yes. And the message that you were saying is that, you can get through this. It is going to be okay. You're not always going to feel that way. Yes. It's a really important message for people to hear.
Yes. And I've been there myself. And when I was,
of course,
and my brother and sister, it's kind of in the family. It's like our method of problem solving as young people is
escape.
Just escape.
Yep.
So when it feels like being alive is it's too painful.
It's too painful.
There's no other way.
A breakup is painful.
And
it's
in those moments when it feels like, there's no other way out, like you can't accept. Right. But so I don't think I realized that, like, you and your siblings both went through.
All 3 of us went through periods of, we both tried to take our lives when we were younger. My mother had died, we were despondent and in different ways, different times.
Around the same, like late teens, early 20s?
Late teens, early 20s.
Wow.
Luckily, I was really pretty innocent when it came to what methods were successful. So I didn't really, made some mistakes in that regard, but really it was a wonderful thing. But my brother and sister both were hospitalized and pretty close to death.
And there's a direct association and correlation genetically.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's.
And so the likelihood of you 2 or the 3 of you having that experience is higher.
Yes.
Well, there's like a genetic component. And also I think the risk factor goes up higher and higher every time you have actually seen a successful suicide.
Yep.
Yeah. So
I'm glad you're
your
here.
siblings are so lucky to
too,
still be
me
alive.
too.
Yes.
I'm very glad I'm here.
I wanted to ask about your son, Eric,
Yes.
how you made sense of that. And do you think he also, were there signs of bipolar?
No, but we, unfortunately we had suicide on my side of the family, but 2 years before he died, again, another brilliant member of the family, was ready to get his PhD. He was giving a big seminar in Tokyo. I think for some reason he didn't get up in the morning. Maybe he had a little too much alcohol the night before. I'm not sure what happened, but he didn't give it in the morning. And then he told his family goodbye because he was going to take his own life as well. And the family found him, had the professor come and find him and take him. And they said, get him to the airport. We need to get him home. And unfortunately, the professor put him in a cab because, he convinced him to do that. It wasn't his fault. And he jumped off a tall building in Tokyo and took his life. So that happened 2 years before Eric died. And that was the only time after that we felt he got some counseling. He looked like he was despondent for a while, and we got some counseling. Very short time, maybe 3 months, and then he right back to his old self. But that was the only time only time we saw maybe there was something we needed to worry about. Otherwise, we didn't.
Did you ever talk about sort of this family history of suicidal depression, like with the siblings, with the kids?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. With my daughters, we do. And really to say, if you get to a point, you've been through it yourself. And I think when you survived it, you see what you're doing to the rest of the family. You see what happens. It stays with them the rest of their lives. It's a life sentence for the rest of us. But he wasn't thinking. And I think that I knew, having been there myself, I knew that when you're at that point, that pain is so bad that your brain can't fathom anything else, and you just want to stop the pain. So I understand that.
And you're not thinking about how other people are going to be experiencing this.
No.
Right.
No, you're just in pain.
Yeah, I think a lot of people assume suicide is a very selfish act, and instead it's really about suffering and pain and having some compassion around that, which is really hard when it's so personal.
Yes.
Kim, I'm wondering if you might expand a little bit. You referenced that your husband died as well.
Yes. Well,
tell us about that.
Well, what I've been finding as I get older is that sometimes we go through these periods where one thing happens after the other, after the other, after the other. And 6 months or a year before Eric died, Jim developed liver cancer. And we thought he was going to die. but he didn't because he had a liver transplant, which is kind of a miracle in that case. And he got a liver transplant. And so then he was going to live because the liver, was not, he had a new liver and it didn't have cancer. And then 6 months after that, Eric died. So my husband emotionally just went down the tubes. That was kind of that time when I discovered I had to be the strong one. And I got treated for depression. I have depression, and I'm treated I'm treated successfully for depression.
That's incredible.
And I started getting treated after Eric died. Jim, my husband, was a stubborn Norwegian, I called him. He's a stubborn Norwegian. The stubborn. We're up in Minnesota. We know the stubborn Norwegians. They, we're baby boomers. That's a sign of weakness. They just won't go. They won't get help. They can get through this. And he tried to do that, but his heart didn't get the message, because his heart that checked out as perfectly healthy before the transplant, he ended up getting quadruple bypass surgery and a valve replaced about a year and a half after his transplant, a year after Eric died. And he went through a lot of other issues. We would say that when we'd celebrate his birthday, only 2 years out of the last 13 did he not almost die. So he would have, Jim, yes, he would have,
Poor Jim.
he had a liver biopsy that punctured an artery and he lost most of his blood, and that, and they had to get him back. That was one time. He had a heart infection, which almost killed him. And then he had just one thing after his diabetic. So he had several diabetic comas. And one time he had developed septic shock, as you know, is a great killer of us older people. He had diabetes. And they put him in a coma. And while he was in the coma, he had a heart attack, but he survived all these things.
Oh, for God's sakes.
And so it was a preparatory for me. It was preparing me, because I kept thinking he was going to die, and then he didn't. I kept thinking he was going to die, and then he didn't.
So
But
it was really 11 lives. So
Yes,
11 out of
11
the
lives.
last
Yes,
13
yes.
Like a
birthdays.
cat.
And it was
Yes.
all the
He was like a cat.
birthdays?
Yes,
Like
and
a
that was a
cat.
joke. It was like a joke. It was like a cat. That was his joke. He had 9 lives.
And
like-
every time he came back, was he like, just kidding?
Yeah,
Still
pretty
here?
much. That last time with the septic shock, though, that was when he had he could no longer work. He was retired, but then he went back to work because he said, I'm getting a little bored, so he went back to work. And that last septic shock was we had to start changing our plans. We had a trip plan that we couldn't take, so we made an alternative trip. And I think that's the key as we are progressing through life, to find alternatives. This isn't working out, so let's find an alternative plan. We went to
Pivot.
Universal Studios and drove around in a cart instead of going to Greece. It was
I love
a
that.
secondary plan, but it worked.
But
I love
as
it.
much as you kind of joke about it and you can look back at it with some humor, those changes can be hard. Yeah. Every one of those is a loss.
Yes.
Every shift or pivot, as you said, is a bit of a loss
right.
and acknowledgement of what's going on.
Yes, absolutely.
And it isn't necessarily in the direction you want it to be going, but it's almost like
Right.
the muscle that you have strengthened like an Olympian is
Yes.
resilience and
Yes.
the bounce back of like,
Yes.
well, that didn't go the way it was supposed to. And that just like Doug was saying, every one of those losses could just be like, I put a fork in me.
Right.
Like how? I mean, seriously, how? How? I mean, you talk about the pit of grief. You talk about, I was decorating it. I bought curtains,
yeah,
new furniture.
yeah.
You were
I was
there.
in there.
You were a lifer. It sounds
Yes,
like
I felt
you-
like that. Yes.
And how? I mean, how did you survive it?
Well, I think that when you're in that pit, you look out and you think it's never going to change. This is my life. My life is in a pit. I'm going to live here forever. And that situation where I was kind of challenged, like, okay, you're living in the pit. You're also bringing other people in the pit, because you do. You bring other people in the pit. And I was just determined. I love my children. I love my husband so much that I was going to fight for them by helping me. I was going to fight for them by helping me. And so I just worked. I'm a Christian, so my faith helped. And I felt like, so I kind of felt that some of you may understand that, some of you don't, depending on how you see God, but I kind of thought the evil one would love to see me in the pit. And so I'd wake up in the morning, and you wake up after that and you're like, okay, this really is my life. It's not a terrible dream. I'm really here. He's gone. What am I going to do? And I would just say, you know what? You're not going to keep me in this pit. I'm going to
love
show
it.
you. So I took
Revenge.
I took revenge. Yes, it's all about revenge on the devil. Revenge on the devil. That's what that is the key. So
Whatever works.
Whatever works. And that worked for me because I could see I'm not going to be here. I'll show you. I'm going to get out of this pit. And it really worked. It really did work for me. My faith really helped. But just defining that I'm going to fight this terrible grief. Because when you wake up in the morning, you're the most helpless. Like, you're sleeping, you wake up and like, oh, really? This is, oh no, this is really the truth. It's not a bad dream. That's kind of when you're the most helpless. And so that's when it takes the biggest fight. And I really have to say that it happens every once in a while now. But if I just say, I'm not letting you get me,
Yep.
I'm out of it.
Yeah.
So
There's this type of therapy called narrative therapy.
Oh.
And I'm just thinking about, like, for those of us that might not be, strong in our faith,
Right,
or might
right.
not find a lot of solace from that. I'm thinking of, I don't know if they're going to find solace from this either, but this narrative therapy, the idea is you take, instead of feeling like I am depressed, I am anxious, I have bipolar, you think about whatever that mental illness is and you externalize it. So it's something outside of you and you give it a persona. Like, what does that depression want for me? Oh, it wants me to curl up in a fetal position and die.
Right.
What does that anxiety want for me? It wants me to hide behind closed doors and never make a fool of myself in front of other humans, right? And so maybe it's even just this idea of like revenge against the externalized
there you
whatever
go.
it is.
That works.
It worked.
Well, and I think
love
that's what you were doing.
It's incredible.
Revenge against that external force, whatever it is.
I love it.
Yeah.
And in your case, evil.
The evil force, and I got my revenge.
You did. Who's laughing
Who's laughing now?
One of the things I'm loving, Kim, about how you talk about this is you're not only over a hump and you've figured out some strategies cognitively and behaviorally to kind of get through the pit, but you also identify kind of the differences in how everybody grieves. And I think it's critically important to say that everyone grieves differently, right?
Right.
And what makes sense of one circumstance for one person isn't necessarily across the board.
Yes,
Right?
absolutely. That is so important.
Yep.
And I've been trying to lose 20 pounds for about 20 years. It's not happening, and so I don't know if I'll ever do that. But some people can work and do all their stuff, and they can lose that 20 pounds.
Or take Ozempic.
Or take Ozempic. There you go. Yeah, that's
Or do
right.
the easy
I might
button.
try that one. But so some people can make it through, and some people can't.
Right.
And I think that's
Right.
really important. I think that the critical part is to try,
Yeah.
and the critical part is to put something out there that gives you a reason to try. And I put in my mind, it was my daughters and my husband, and I put them out there as they are going through this too, and I'm going to do everything I can to help them get through it. And in order to do that, I got to get myself out of this pit. So that was kind of what was my motivation was.
Yeah.
I had to have motivation. So it was revenge and then helping so that's kind of how I worked it in my head.
Powerful.
Well, and it's interesting too. I really want to say to everybody who's listening or our audience today, it's okay to be sad even today.
absolutely.
Like you can be, I think we assume that the grief process, which I'm going to get to the phases of grief in a second here. We assume that resolution or healing means that you don't feel it anymore. And that's a mistake.
Yeah.
You get to go back to that place over and over and over.
Yes.
So let's talk theory for a second.
Yes.
So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who I quoted several times in my graduate research,
Yes.
I adore her theories. I think she's right on about a number of things. She had denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance as the 5 phases of grief.
Yes.
I will say there was a 6th added about making or creating purpose
Yes.
In your life. I'm very curious how those phases of grief apply to you.
Well, right after Eric died, I also lost my job as a dentist because I developed a nerve damage in my drilling fingers, and and I was like the support of the family because Jim was sick. So just one more thing to add in there.
Oh.
And so all of a sudden I was working full time, and I loved I loved dentistry. I was having so much fun.
Your patients were glad you lost your drilling capacity, though.
Only the drilling part.
The
Otherwise,
drilling
everyone
part, yes.
loves dentists.
Well, I was in a small town, and I knew my patients. I did generations. I loved what I did, and so all of a sudden, my ability to make an income also was gone. Luckily, Jim was working part-time, so that worked out. But so part of my identity left. But during that time, then all of a sudden I had time in my hands, right? And because I was a dentist, we kind of have a little issue about, seeking help too. I mean, I really had it. So I should have gone to a grief counselor, but I thought, hey, I have time. I'll become one. So, this is what we just, makes sense, right?
It's called efficiency.
It's efficiency, right? I got time on my hands. What am I going to do now, right? So I studied grief counseling. And as I was reading through Kubler-Ross, I really did identify with her. But what I really identified with is there's another guy called Worden, and he has the 4 tasks. Okay, I like tasks.
Yes.
Stages are like, okay, you go through the stages, right? To me,
It's
in
a
my
little more
mind.
like helpless.
Yes, it's more helpless. Task. I can embrace a task.
Oh my
right?
God, I love it.
I love task. So they have the task of mourning, and he starts out with acceptance, which was the last Kubler-Ross one. So he starts out with acceptance. And then the second one is the processing the grief. Oh dear, that was the worst part. Processing the grief, but you got to process it, right? I always wanted to be like Rip Van Winkle and go to sleep for 20 years and wake up and like, okay, I'm good now, but that doesn't work. You have to process it. And then the next part was coming to terms with your new reality. The new you. I was not a mother of a son when Eric died, and now I'm not a wife, anymore when Jim died. So you have to kind of come to terms with your identity. Then the last one, which is I loved, is to develop a new life with that person. We're in your heart. You're not just denying it happened. You have that person in your heart, but developing a new reality in which you can live your life, live in the present, live with joy with that person in your heart. And that's the final goal. And I love that because it's like, I could do that. And so I've written a couple books for widows, and I've kind of adjusted that for the widowhood. And so I have some tasks here. So I have a new book out called, it's Naomi and the Widows Club. It's a workbook. I wrote Naomi and the Widows Club a few years back, and now we have a workbook that also has an audio. It's 8 weeks, and it's for Christians. It's a Christian workbook. So it's based on religion. And so you'd have to adjust God to however you see God. But we kind of looked into an 8-part series, and one of them is finding a safe, strong place, a place where you can feel comfortable, whether it's your family, your friends. Go out and find a group. This might be a group. Find a place, because you need a safe place where you can talk about things. Next one is vanquishing fear, because we all have fear. Fear is your mortal enemy. Vanquish that fear, but it's part of that first part when you lost your husband. Conquering loneliness. When you're a widow, all of a sudden nobody's there anymore. You go home and nobody knows where you are. You go out to the grocery store, nobody knows you're there. And it's a very lonely thing. So conquering that, working to conquer that. Updating your identity. You lose your identity many times. I'm a grandma now, but now I'm a grandma of children that are getting older, so they don't need me anymore. So that's my little thing now. I got to get used to that. Like, oh,
You're clearly
gosh.
grieving that.
I am,
because
yes.
you just saw your 12-year-old
I just
twin
did it,
grandchildren.
and we had a great time.
Teenagers.
I know they're going to be teenagers, but they aren't going to need me so much. I'm not as important in their lives, and so you never stop. You got stuff, and then trusting in God's plan, or however you see God, is one of them. Then you start embracing peace. How can I get peace in my life? And then searching for purpose. Having purpose in your life is so important. My purpose now, I'm writing and I'm giving seminars and so on. I love that. I'm having a good time, and I have a purpose with my grandchildren, which is now changing because they don't need me as much anymore, but I'm adjusting. I'm doing that. And then finally, I think discovering joy, even in the painful times. And having joy in your life is such a gift. It's such a gift to have joy. Joy and happiness are different. Joy kind of comes from within. Happiness, you're happy and you're sad. Like, I'm a little sad that kids are getting older, but I have to adjust. But I'm happy. I had a great time at the party. But I have joy around it all. And so having joy in painful times is my 6th one. And then getting through the holidays.
And getting through the holidays. And the firsts, I'm sure every first.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit intrigued by acceptance being at the beginning. I'm processing quickly what I think of this theory, and deepen my thoughts about it. I think there's a couple things I want to say. It's an interesting thing because I think depending on the nature of your loss, like with your husband, you had a little bit of time to process and anticipate that grief, whereas with your son,
that was hard.
You didn't even know there was a breakup, I'm sure.
It was so hard to accept.
I cannot imagine, because I think those sudden, traumatic, and unexpected losses are the most difficult to grieve. I want to go to fear, managing fear and managing loneliness. One of the things that I think about this, and I'm probably doing a public service announcement on this, I think we're so socialized to think we're supposed to do something in this life. We're supposed to partner. We're supposed to have kids. We're supposed to do all of those things. And I call bullshit on all of that. I think it's one of the most incredible things to watch patients that I work with, but also in my own experience, just kind of figure out, like, what do I really want? And what really gives me peace inside and happiness? It's not what everyone else thinks we should have. So part of that is challenging that fear and that loneliness piece and knowing you can love yourself.
Absolutely.
And since you became your own grief counselor, you can do counseling with yourself in the mirror,
In the mirror.
Well,
which I've done several times every morning.
I'll work with this over the teenage thing. I might have to do that.
I know. It feels
There'll be
fresh
a
to
new
me.
chapter
That's a
in the
fresh
book.
one.
New chapter.
For sure.
But it's relationships too. And
Yeah.
when I talk about purpose, like all that stuff
Yeah.
you heard about all my background with all the fancy titles, that wasn't my purpose. That really didn't count. It's like you're interrelationship with the people in your life. Every time you meet a person, interact, you're
I agree.
establishing a legacy.
Yep.
So purpose doesn't have to be some elaborate purpose. It's just being here and we're all going through this life together. Our purpose could just be let's help each other get through it. That's
It's
the
more
minimal
than
purpose.
enough.
Yeah.
I'll tell you
It's
also, and we
incredible.
kind of do this each time, Talia, we talk about this, the world that we live in right now is struggling to find purpose.
Oh, yeah.
We're all kind of making sense of things. I won't comment on the incident that happened yesterday. However, there were several deaths yesterday in our culture. Dr. Ruth, who we all
Richard
love talking about sex.
Simmons?
I know, Richard Simmons, which kind of made me think about, like, was it really worth losing all that weight?
That was exactly. He was 76,
I
right?
was horrified by my
76. No,
Yes,
thought
I
the
know.
same thing.
Okay, I
Maybe
almost
that
went
is a sign to you. Forget about that
Fuck
goal.
that 20
Scratch
pounds.
that.
20 pounds, I just can't-
Exactly, scratch it.
Yeah, he was all lean.
Who needs it? Eat that piece of cake, everybody.
Yeah, that's right.
I can't even imagine acceptance being at the beginning either. I was thinking
Right?
the same thing because it feels
It
like
threw me
okay,
off a little bit.
by the time you get to acceptance, it's like 5 years later. But there's like I'm even thinking about my own experience of grief and how in order, even a psychologist, that when I think about processing and healing and moving on, there is this part of me that's like, I don't want to. I love him. I miss him. That's where he lives now.
Which
So-
might be acceptance, by the way. It might be your
Right.
version
Yes,
of it.
yes.
But
Right?
there's like some weird obstacle to, I don't want to move on. I want to carry it right here forever. Like you can't make me. And I don't want to share it in a grief group and I don't want to share it with other. So what is that?
I want to go a little personal with that. So I'm going to use your cousin,
Okay. Yeah.
right?
My
Assuming you
sweet
might
cousin.
be
Yes, that's
talking about your
exactly.
cousin who
Yes.
died a couple years ago unexpectedly from a heart attack. You talk so beautifully about him, and his spirit is so alive, even in your home right now with some family visiting.
Yes.
So I think you have accepted, but you're not forgetting. And there's something really beautiful about that for you.
But it took, and I'm still like not even there. Like I am very selfish with my grief in that
I don't think
it's
there is such a
almost
thing.
like too precious for the outside world. It's just a really weird experience that I'm having with it.
Yeah, but that's what we were talking about. Everybody gets to
Everyone
have their own
grieves
experience.
differently.
I don't think that's selfish at all. It's yours.
It's
this
mine.
is yours.
But you're
Yours is-
saying, but community is such an important piece too. And I'm just
It doesn't need to be.
right. And I'm just bringing up like this weird, like, do other people experience that too? Does everyone want to share with a grief group? Or do people sometimes also feel like it's mine?
Well,
And
my-
go ahead, please.
when we lost our son, we had a dear friend, Lyndon Dungey, whose brother is Tony Dungey. He's a dentist down the street. And he was a dear friend of ours, and he helped us get through that. And one of the things he said, he got some advice from his brother, was we need to accept each other and how we're grieving. My husband, like Eric's room,
Yeah.
I couldn't go into his room for 3 years.
Yeah.
I couldn't even walk into the room. I could hardly walk past the door. My husband would go sit there every night.
Yes.
And he would like to listen to video where he had, and I couldn't hear his voice.
Yes.
And so we had to learn to accept each other, that we're different in our grieving.
Yep.
And that's how our marriage stayed together, really. I mean, because a lot of people married, a lot of divorces after a loss of a
They
child.
sure do.
And
Yep.
one of the things, we just accepted each other's grief. We talked to each other, said, now, Jim, if I'm home, please don't play the video so I can hear, okay? Because that's going to set
beautiful,
me
yeah.
off. And I just accepted that he could go sit in his room for an hour or two every night.
You
and I
honored
couldn't go
each
in.
other's process.
Yeah, I mean, both were probably not the best way to handle it, but we just did the best we could.
There's
as we
no
moved forward,
best
yeah.
way.
Kim, can I ask you, did it bother you that he did that?
Before I really understood that I needed to accept that, I thought that, he's going down, it's making him get worse. I was judging his grieving for a little bit.
I anticipate you were.
I
And
was.
maybe his and vice
started
versa as
judging
well.
mine.
Absolutely.
And when Lyndon talked to us about how we just have to accept each other, and we looked at each other and go, yeah, we do, and we let that go. And it was, it was years to get beyond the actual grieving process of that loss.
There's no
It took
question.
many-
That's a
it took us
very
long time.
complicated loss.
Right,
I think
right.
suicide is the most
Very
complicated.
Yes.
Kim, what's interesting about that is that, that process where you both want to feel understood by the other.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like really hard because he wanted you to probably go in that room with him
did.
and sit with him.
And it would
And
kill
you were
me.
like, I'm
Yeah.
not fucking going in there.
That's
I don't know
right.
how you keep going in there and triggering me because that door's
That's right.
open then,
That's
right?
right, exactly.
And
The
so
door
you,
opened.
you
Oh.
want understanding, and it's really hard to achieve when you're in that circumstance. So
Right.
I'm pleased that you got to that other side quickly and have somebody just kind of say, you get both to grieve yourself, your son differently. So I think it's a really important piece of this, but I also think that understanding from the closest person who had the same loss you did
Yes.
was particularly important to try to find that common bond, which you both did, grieve your son. And that was the commonality. It's big. And of course, this is a podcast about mental health and relationships. And Kim, you identified when I told you that I was going to ask you this question,
Oh, okay.
ask away. And you were also very clear, no one's ever asked you.
No, that's right. Okay.
So one of the things that I think when we have so much loss in our life, and there's so many close, intimate loves that you've lost,
Right.
your son, your husband, mom, there's so many losses. I think it's hard to go back out in the world. I think it's hard to trust in a safe manner and start loving again and exploring intimate connections, even with your own kids. Like you had to remember that you had two other kids that needed your love and your presence in this life. But I'm kind of curious about relationships, friendships, romantic relationships, your 5 boyfriends that you referenced before you came in. I'm kidding. That's a
boyfriends.
joke, everybody.
Well, the interesting thing is when you look at romantic relationships, I work with, so that first book, Naomi and the Widows Club, is a widow's devotional. So I work with widows groups quite a bit. And most of us are older, and we don't really think we're going to look for love again right now. We're going to just maintain our lifestyle as it is, but some people do.
Right.
And it works both ways. So there's no real answer to that. And right now, I think it would complicate my life so much. So I'm not really in the market. But
I'm
that's
with you.
important. That's important, right? I mean, it's important to accept both sides. And I have a couple that
Right.
just got married, so it's like, yay!
Oh,
Some of my
wow.
widows got married already.
Yeah.
Yay! So, and I think that's wonderful. Now, of course, then they have to work with their children. That's the other issue. So, there's a lot of things going on there. But yay! But when it comes to relationships, it is when I lost Eric. My daughters were older, and they had, they were significant others, and they were eventually got married. And at first, when the kids were little, the joke in the family was Eric was the one that was going to have kids. And the joke was he would have to find somebody with childbearing hips. That was kind of the joke in the family for him to marry. And the girls were saying, well, I'm not going to have kids. We're not going to, they're lawyers and they went to school. They're not going to have kids. And so I thought, okay, well, then he died. In my mind, my grandchildren died with him, right? And so at the time, it was that's okay because there was a family of 5, and now I lost one, and I can't stand to have lost that one. We're only a family of 4, but now there's only 3 other people, so the chances that they're going to live are good. If I add new people into it, then I could lose them. So I don't want to add new people. So I really don't want grandchildren. Grandchildren would really be scary. So for a long time, I had that view that I'm not going to have any grandchildren. I don't have any more people that I'm going to love that much that can hurt so much when I die.
That's right.
It's kind of crazy talk, but that's what it was real.
It's not crazy
It's
talk.
grief.
That's where
I
that
know,
fear
that's what-
sets
Yeah.
in.
That's a fear. It's a fear. I could. So when my older daughter was pregnant, she got pregnant the first time. I was just starting to get over that, and I was really excited about it. And then a few months later, she found out she was having twins.
Wow.
So I thought double bonus, and I got over that really quickly. And any of you that are grandparents, the first time you meet your new grandbaby, you're just completely in love, and your whole everything changes. So it turned out that I'm so excited that I have those grandchildren. But I do know that there are people that lose their husbands that have no children.
Right.
And so what do you do? And I've been fortunate in my life that I have dear, dear, dear friends, and I have new friends that are widows. I'm hanging out with the widows now. We're having fun. We have widow groups. We do widow trips.
I love it.
I'm hanging out with the widows, and I'm having fun with the widows. But I have my old friends who are not widows. So I'm fortunate that I over years have really maintained friendships. Those are the times I feel really good. Now, many people are introverts. They don't have a lot of friends, right?
Yep.
And so I find that I have a wonderful hobby. I paint porcelain. Nobody likes porcelain anymore, so it's kind of an art that nobody really
No,
wants.
you're going to bring it back into
I paint
style.
porcelain. I love painting porcelain. It's very therapeutic for me. It's kind of like dentistry. We did porcelain in dentistry because it was porcelain teeth, so I have a connection. So I'm painting porcelain. It's wonderful. And it takes forever to finish anything. It takes 50, 60 hours to finish a piece. It's very time consuming. It's not marketable. But I find that I get a lot of peace there, and I could lose myself in my painting. So I think for those that are introverts, finding something that matches your personality, and we go back to that purpose, you know, to find something that makes your life meaningful in some way, whether it's volunteering, whether it's painting, whatever it is. But look out and go find something, because it makes such a difference. I know when my husband retired, he didn't find anything. So he was kind of sitting around twiddling his thumbs. He said, this sucks. I'm going to go back to work. And he went back to work because he couldn't find anything. So I think it's really important that if you're an introvert or you're someone that doesn't have a lot of people in your life, find something that makes you feel good. And there are lots of things
Absolutely.
out there.
And there are also like online communities that are like semi-social, or you could, just like you said, like do volunteer opportunities, like learn how to knit and knit something for like babies with cancer or something where it doesn't have to be like join a group of 1,000 people and go to the wine country.
Yes.
Although that does sound like
that sounds good too. But.
You know, it's interesting, Kim, you talk about this, you know, anxiety or fear about having another child or a grandchild because the fear of loss again, like you would not be able to handle it. I want to say that people do that with pets. Like if people lose their pet of 11 years or 12 years, you know, it's really hard to move on. Or a cat that's lived 20 years, it's really hard to get another one. Some people rush out and replace it right away, and other people just don't, because they want to avoid that potential pain, because inevitably we outlive our pets generally. So I really want to say that. I think that's an important part. And I think that's the other part about love. I think a lot of people who have lost a spouse in particular kind of go through that process of not wanting to try again because it was so painful the first round.
Yes.
So,
Dr. Kim, I wanted to ask you about obstacles to healing. And you mentioned a few, and I just really want to like sit with it, because there are so many. Like you mentioned shame and guilt. I'm just going to like say the ones, but like talk about whichever ones speak to you. The survivor's guilt, fairness, choices. Yeah, I mean, Doug just asked the choices after becoming a widow. There's no wrong answer there, but yeah.
Well, with the shame, I mean, when your mother and your son commit suicide, what do they have in common? Me, you know, so you live with, it's a false guilt, but you live with that, right? And so there was a lot of shame, a lot of guilt involved, and a lot of why me. And in fact, you know, so Jim had cancer. Well, first of all, my brother died, and 2 months later, Jim got cancer. And then 6 months later, got a transplant. And 6 months after that, Eric died. And a year after that, I lost my job. And I remember sitting in the car. I was at Mayo Clinic when I lost, you know, my ability to practice dentistry. They said, you know, you got to pick another profession. You can't do this anymore. And I was working full time the day before.
Ceramics.
I know, ceramics. That's my new thing. But I remember, I have a really good faith. You know, my church is really very supportive. So I was calling my pastor, and I was on the phone with him. And I was on the phone, and I was like, what the heck? This isn't fair. Come on. I've had enough. Don't you think I've had enough? What's going on? You know, I kind of felt like, what the heck? Why me? You know, you look out there, other people they have 3 kids. And I was counting children, which is really odd. So like a family would come in and they'd have 3 kids. I used to have 3 kids. I wish I had 3 kids again. That someone would have 2 kids, and I go, oh, they had 2 kids and they seem like they're okay. And then some people would have 7 kids. Oh, I should have had 7 kids. But in my groups that I've been with, I have a friend who had 7 kids. She lost her son to suicide. She was grieved just as much as I did. You know, so none of these things make sense. But your brain goes to weird places when you're in grief.
Absolutely.
And so I think those were main obstacles: overcoming shame, comparing my life with other people's lives that looked so much happier than mine. I mean, we just can't do that. We just have to this is my journey. I'm good enough as I am. I'm good enough alone, and I'm going to take the journey and see what happens, and that really helped me to get rid of all that other stuff.
When we did our little meet and greet, and there was one story about one time that you lost your husband. You have to share it with us because I feel like there's so much in that. No one's even good. It's like out of a movie. Jim and his 11 lives.
Yes. Well, Jim, he had 11 times and he almost died, but didn't. But then when he really was time for him to die, it was in hospice, and it was during COVID. And so there had been some time he'd been in the hospital with nobody there. And then he had to go to a nursing home for recovery, and it was not a good situation. And so when he came out of that, he says, "I never want to do that again." And I said, "Okay, Jim, we'll work it so you don't." And he ended up in the hospital for a while later as he was declining. And the doctors are not really good these days about telling you like he's near the end of his life. It's just they keep they'll treat and treat.
Malpractice too.
It's a difficult thing. They're just trying to keep him better. But he was in the hospital and he wasn't getting better. He was getting worse. So I had a talk with the doctor, and he said, "Well, we don't really want him to go out." And Jim was like, "I got to get out of here. I got to get out of here." And I thought, "Okay, honey." And so our kids were at our cabin that we had, and so I took him out with 6 oxygen tanks, trying to make sure keep him alive, and went to the cabin. And then we brought him home, and the nurses were the ones that said, home nurses, "You know what? It's time for hospice." And they called the doctor immediately. He said, "Yes, it's time for hospice." So once we kind of figured out, okay, it's time for hospice, and I had really worked hard and praying hard that I would be able to do this well, because this is your most important job, right? You're helping somebody to die. It's one of the most important jobs. And so it was COVID, and at COVID we learned you could be home 24 hours a day. And it works.
Yes.
Like, who knew? Now, before that,
Who knew?
I have to go grocery shopping. No, you don't. They can deliver it to your house. So
Instacart.
Instacart, yeah. So I could stay. So staying home wasn't a problem,
right.
And he needed help. He needed, I'd kind of help him lift up, and he was in kind of a wheelchair, and he had broken an arm because he tried to stand up when he shouldn't, And so he was in hospice at our home, and on the morning of what would have been Eric's 33rd birthday, Jim was in the tub. We got a walk-in tub for him, and those are great, by the way. When you have trouble, walk-in tub. He was in the tub, and he loved getting in the tub, and so I was helping him get out of the tub, and he took his oxygen off just for a second to put his shirt on. And right as I put his shirt on, he just went, huh, and just was gone. There was no heartbeat. There was no pulse. There was no breathing. He was gone. And he was DNR, and I did mess this up a little bit. He was DNR, and you don't, on an older person, you don't want to do chest compressions, because then they're going to wake up and they've got broken ribs as well as whatever's going to kill them anyway, right? So I did give him some rescue breathing, and that didn't work. So I was giving him rescue breathing for maybe 5-10 minutes, and obviously nothing was happening. So I called the hospice, and I said, "Okay, he's passed away." And they said, "We'll come right over." Hospice is fabulous, by the way. They're going to come right over. And I got on the phone with my daughter, and we were crying. He's dead, and we were just all crying. And after about 10 minutes on the phone, as I was crying to my daughter, I looked up, and he was in the tub like this, and all of a sudden he went, like in the movies, like really, like it was unbelievable. So I dropped the phone. He's alive. I dropped the phone, and I ran over to him. And then just as I ran to him, the hospice nurse came to the door. So she came in. So it was at least 20 minutes. He was not breathing, had no pulse, and he was in the tub. And now he was unconscious. So I believe this is a God thing. So now I'm going, okay, now I screwed it up, because the last thing he wanted was to be in a vegetative state. And I gave him rescue breathing, which might have helped to keep him alive. And now he's in a vegetative state. So I really screwed it up, because he really just would want to go. And but they got him out of the tub. They got him into the bed. Got a catheter in, which he hated that. But he was unconscious, so he really didn't bother him at all. And then all of a sudden he woke up, and his brain was completely there. The rest of his body wasn't. He couldn't really move much.
That is crazy.
His brain was there, and he was talking to us, and he said, "Well, why am I in the bed? I was just in the tub."
Wow.
It was crazy. And I have to admit, I kind of wanted him to say, "And I went up to heaven and I saw Eric." And but he'd never come back if he did that. So, I didn't realize that wouldn't happen. But so he was in the bed, and he said, what happened? And I told him, and he just couldn't believe it. And so I
can't believe it.
I can't either.
20 minutes.
I cannot figure this out in my head. What happened?
I can't either. I'm going with
Like
God, but whatever you believe.
It must have been, because medically it makes no sense.
It makes no sense. And so I called his family. He's got a large family. I said, "You know what? He is not doing well. We thought we lost him this morning. If you want to see him, come over." So we had a big party. He came over, all the family came over. There were cousins that were in town, but normally wouldn't be in town. His daughter Ashley from Kansas City was in town. They were all there, and they were sitting with him, talking to him. We're all on the bed together. He was sitting in the bed, and my nieces were like, plushing, because they were nurses. They, plushed up his arms and his leg, and he was like in heaven. Everybody was panting. He was in heaven.
So much.
He got all the Diet Coke he could drink, which is he was addicted to Diet Coke. All the Diet Coke he could drink. He wanted ice cream. We got ice cream. We got food. We had this big party. It was fabulous. And he had a brother that had not talked to him in about 10 years. And he came over and had a videotape of when they were 20 and they were climbing Mount Whitney. And so we're watching this videotape from the brother that he hadn't talked to climbing Mount Whitney as he'd done 20 years ago. It was just this phenomenal day. And then the next morning, he just passed away quietly, but there were people. He actually kind of slipped out of the bed. I had to kind of catch him and then sit with him and call the nurse, the poor hospice nurses. She came over. We got him back up on the bed. And as they were lifting him up onto the bed, he was talking right before that. He just did that same thing, like, and we put him on the bed, and the nurse said, "You can take the oxygen off now." And I said, "Well, yesterday."
Yes.
I was going to say, it might happen again.
Life
you never know.
14.
Let's wait 20 minutes.
Let's wait. But no, he was gone then. But the thing for me was, it was weird about shame and guilt around death.
Yes, full circle.
I would have felt shame. If he had died the first time, I would have felt complicit in his death because I had taken his oxygen off to put it, which is false guilt, because that's what you do, right? To get it on.
Right.
But I would have felt, I was already feeling that way. But when he died, I was standing in the corner. There was a hospice nurse and 2 rescuers between me and him. So I had nothing to do with the actual death. And I could feel like, okay, God, I guess it's his time. And I kind of felt God was saying, okay, Kim, come on, it's his time. And I was like, no, I killed him. And so he gave me a second chance. He gave me a do-over. And so we had that wonderful, like almost a pre-funeral. We had like a living funeral before he died.
That's what everybody wants, probably. Like, instead of everyone crying, let's have a party and listen to my favorite music and all the Diet Coke.
All the Diet Coke.
I don't know if everybody wants that, but I definitely want good food. I am curious, Kim, this is off the agenda. So as a death doula, which is a fascinating thing that you do, I'm kind of curious if you planned yours and what you need.
Yes, I am doing that now. So I wrote this book called Are You Ready? How to Build a Legacy to Die For, which talks about building your legacy now, which is showing everybody love. It doesn't have to be complicated. Building your legacy now. Understanding you're going to die, because the problem is we pretend we're not going to die.
Yeah.
And so I see people that are in the hospital and someone is actively dying and they don't have their affairs together.
Right.
So that when they die, their whole family falls apart because they're fighting over all the stuff.
Yeah.
And they could have just said something while they were like, maybe the 5 or 6 weeks in hospice. They could have said, okay, let's get your stuff together. But they won't, because they're afraid to admit that she might die or he might die. And we need to get our stuff together for our kids, because I don't want my kids fighting over anything when I go. So luckily, both my girls are lawyers. And so when we wrote up our will, or maybe not, but we wrote up our will, I sent it to both of them and they approved. I said, don't, and Jim was still alive, you look over this will, and if there's anything you're concerned about, say it now or forever hold your peace, because we're going to sign it and it's going to go. And I've set up so all my jewelry is divided up. They already said what they're going to want. It's all written down.
Like, while you're alive.
While I'm alive.
I think that's fantastic.
I had the conversation with them, and I have my obituary picture picked out, which is I'm in Mongolia holding up an eagle that's open in his arms on a horse. It's fabulous.
And I know what you're wearing.
What?
That.
What? Oh, I should probably.
I know.
But I'm in Mongolia, and I don't look that good, and on the picture I don't look so good. The eagle looks so much better, but it's like adventure grandma, right? I mean, rather than they would have picked out like a lovely shot with my hair blowing back, like in this, like this right now,
from this moment.
Right, from this moment, they would have picked that, but that's not what I want. I want to be adventure grandma. That's what I want to be, and so I'm writing my own obituary, and I'm writing my funeral plans, and I have so I've got all that down. I wrote letters to all of them, telling how much I love them. And it's all in a binder. That's what the book is. The book tells you how to get the binder all put together. So you have one binder. So when I die, all they have to do is go into my room. They know exactly where it is. It's in the safe. They open up the safe. They have the number. Pick out the binder. Everything's in there. My titles are in there. My birth certificate's in there. All my letters to them are in there. All my wishes, my passwords, all that stuff they need to know. Where all the accounts are. It's all in that book. And then they don't have to go searching, because they'd be cursing your name searching through the closets, right?
So
Ma,
Kim,
I can't believe she did that.
it's really funny. I don't have my obituary or my funeral plans, but I have a book. It's called Dad Stuff.
There you
It's
go.
black. My kids
Dad
know where it
Stuff.
is.
There it is.
And it has all of my accounts. It has who does my lawn, my gardening, all that sort of thing.
That's
So
what you
all
need.
you need
Yeah.
is to pick out your photo.
Yes.
I think I could totally
Pick it
see
out.
you like arm in arm with like a lion or something
Yeah.
really bold.
Yeah.
You can
or
Photoshop
gorilla.
It, right?
A gorilla.
You can Photoshop it now.
Oh yes, but what's so brilliant is that I mean
Or with
you're
my
right.
new picture
Your
that
new
Nick is giving me.
picture.
Right.
You
You can put your
already
face
have a
in the
beautiful
picture.
photo.
Put your face in the picture.
Nick, weren't you going to do a picture of me?
Photoshop. With no eyes though, because the
You're
men have
lying.
no eyes. Only the women have eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's
remember?
going to dig out my eyes on the picture. With
With a
a,
long neck. I'd love to see that.
anyway, I interrupted you.
No.
It's, I mean, no one talks about this.
No.
No one wants to talk to their parents about
No.
this. No one even wants to talk to their parents about, like, is it time to downsize? Is it time to think about your future? I don't even know how to access anything because then your parent is going to think that you're like wishing them dead or something. And then the parents don't want to acknowledge it.
Yeah.
And so you are really rebranding this as this beautiful legacy work.
Yes,
Which
that's why
they're doing
we're-
more in the hospice and
Yes.
I love it.
in hospitals as well. They're doing a lot of planning with people that go in for inpatient.
Right.
It's interesting. One of my kids doesn't like talking about it. The other one is okay with it. And one of them said, I want everything new. And the other one said, I want everything old in the house. I'm like, that's up to you guys.
That's a perfect combination.
It is kind of, except there's going to be some medium stuff, I think.
Maybe you need to figure that out next week.
I don't want to. I'm going to let them.
Too bad.
And that's your choice. I think
Is.
you can.
I think so
You can
too.
choose that. But I think
Yeah.
it's important for us to come to terms with this is going to happen because what I see
Yeah.
in people my age, I live in a little condo now. We just sold our cabin, which was my daughter and her husband told my husband and I that you cannot die till you clean out that shed at the cabin. You cannot die. And my husband didn't listen to him. So it was up to me. So I have now cleaned out the shed. I sold the cabin. I'm in a little condo. And I think what I see among my friends is that too many people wait until they have to move.
That's
Yeah.
right.
And if you can plan it ahead of time, know ahead of time, and kind of choose where you want to go.
Yeah.
Because so many of my friends, okay, they're having to struggle. I got a new hip, they have to struggle, and now they have to move, and there aren't many choices. Whereas if you
Right.
planned it ahead of time, know that it's good to downsize, and then get rid of our stuff. I mean, that's the hardest part of all is getting rid of our stuff. I had stuff, and you have to.
There's so much stuff
there's so much
accumulated
stuff.
over so many years.
Yes.
I just did that 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, you did.
There you go. So
And the
you're
interesting
getting
thing is, everybody whose parents have died and there's a hoard or a lot of stuff. Like I remember one of my patients actually said, please don't save any of your greeting cards. No one cares.
They're for
don't get
us
it.
while we're alive.
They are.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of fascinated. So I love that you did that. And I think that's one of the things. I think it's called Swedish death cleaning. There's
I've
an
never
actual
heard of
There's a book
this.
there is a
yes.
book on it, and you get ready for your death by cleaning up.
Right.
I have cleaned up everything in my house as of 3 weeks ago. I took a week
go.
off
I
to do
will
it.
say my mom has done such a beautiful job of this.
Yeah.
And she also, at the age of 80, I probably wasn't supposed to say that out loud. She,
60.
But she looks like she's 50, really. But she, instead of waiting until she had to move, she chose to downsize, move into this gorgeous little boutique apartment. And she's so happy. And I think that she would say she feels years and years younger because she got
Yeah.
rid of all that stuff that was just weighing her down.
It's kind of like a monkey on our backs when because we don't
I think it
we
is.
don't want to move. We know we need to move, but if we move, we got to get rid of the stuff, and so we don't want to move because the stuff is keeping you where you don't really want to be,
Right.
And it's a burden. And so when you finally do it, and it is hard work, I wish, but there are companies out there actually that I hired a company that I did the cabin. They took care of everything.
That's
There are
great.
companies out there that'll do it, and I put money in because I don't want the kids to feel like somebody's overburdened and having to take care of the stuff because they live closer than the other. So I put money set aside in my will to take care of a company, a professional company to come out. They can go in and take what they want and have the professional company will come in and clean everything out. And then nobody has to feel that they were, they
What
had
a
to do most
gift.
of the work. It's
What
a gift to them. Yeah.
That is the purpose.
It's really it's a really interesting thing. And I love that you're there, and it does feel clean, right?
It feels great.
I want to go to the word legacy. We're getting close on kind of time here.
Yeah, we're gonna wrap
and we
in a
want to
second.
open it up to anybody who has any very specific questions for you. And by the way, a whole nother topic. I mean, a whole nother episode on
topic.
how to organize and get rid of your shit and what that means to kind of your life history.
I
Like
love
it's really
that.
something. I will tell you, you know, and I told you this, Talia, when I was going through my house stuff, like the most emotional part was not the stuff about my kids or seeing the I love you daddy pictures that they made with crayons, because I kept those. But I will tell you, it was my own stuff and going through my own life history. You know, in high school, I wasn't necessarily myself. I wasn't out. I didn't know who I was necessarily, but I had loving people in my life at the time, one of whom sitting right there. But I will say, you know, I think there's just this amazing experience we get by going through our own stuff. Another topic, though, another episode. Let's talk legacy for a second. What do you want to say about that?
I think that, again, every interaction you have with other people is your legacy. I'm a person that believes God has a plan for all of us. We have different plans for different people. It's not, you know, you don't have to win a Nobel Prize or a Golden Globe. It's what you do with other people, how you make people feel when you're around them. That's your legacy.
Beautiful.
Everybody has that ability to do that. And I think that we need to just focus on getting up during the day. And if we were to take a look at what we've done, who we've made happy, who we had good conversations with, that's your legacy. And I just hope people can learn that, because I think sometimes depression, especially midlife crisis, many times comes into play when people are going, oh my gosh, I should have accomplished this, and this. And really, when you retire, you know, I was a dentist, and you know, as dentists, we walk in and everything gets cleaned up for us. It's amazing. You know, you walk in and you're like a little celebrity in your office, and they even hand you the instruments. You don't even have to reach for your instruments. They hand them to you. It's fabulous. But when you go home, like, who cares? When you're retired, who cares what you did? Nobody cares. When you retire, it doesn't matter what you did. It's who you are. And I think we need to realize that's an important thing all along our life, and have the ability to know that we're enough alone. We're enough by ourselves, and the more happiness you can bring to other people, the happier you become. So
I love that. I love it. I love it. And it sort of reminds me of when my cousin, who was really like my soulmate and brother, when he died, I went down some weird rabbit hole of podcast, like,
We had just started.
Yes, we had just started, but I was like, and I was just discovering podcasts sort of as we were building our own, but I went down this rabbit hole of these near-death experiences of like, what are people saying? What happens when you die? And the only people that know are the people that have come back to tell us all about it. And I was like, I don't even believe in this, but do I? And then I just like rabbit hole. But I remember there was this common thread where everyone was talking about the first part that people were experiencing when they died, of course, before they came back. And it was experiencing how other people experienced you in like fast forward warp speed. Every time you shook someone's hand, every time you laughed at someone, mocked someone, cut them off, every time you said an affirming, kind thing, every connection you made. And that has stuck with me. And so all of a sudden when you're describing a legacy, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's it. It's like, it's our brand. It's how we're showing up. It's this beautiful work.
it's interesting you should say that, because I did not have a near-death experience. I was not unconscious, but I was whitewater rafting in dental school, and I got stuck under a hydraulic, which is when I fell out of the boat and the waves go around a rock, and that can kill people. And you're there, you're not popping up, right? And so I was stuck under the hydraulic, and I was going, uh-oh, am I going to die?
Oh,
and
God.
I had that happen to me. All that stuff was starting to happen, but luckily at one point it just popped me out. And so I wasn't unconscious, so I can't say it's a near-death experience.
I don't know, good enough for me.
But it's interesting that, when you have things like that in your life and then you read about it and you go, oh, it just makes it more real to you. And I do believe that.
Oh my gosh. I mean, this is so powerful. One last question before I want you to plug all of the things that you're working on and before we open it up for questions from the audience. But if you had to give just one little takeaway advice for people that just can't even picture ever getting out of that grief pit, what would it be?
I would say, please fight. It's worth the fight. I've been in the pit. It's a horrible place to live. Learning to get out of it and fighting. I mean, get professional help. I take medication that helps me. Get whatever help you need. to fight your way out of the pit, because living in joy for the moment is wonderful for you, but it's also wonderful for everybody you come in contact with. So leaving that legacy of having an interaction, if you can do it in a joyful way, is a positive thing for you, but also for the people you come in contact with. So just fight. It's worth the fight. That would be my advice.
I would add as well, I don't know, Talia, if you have anything to add to that. I would add that you really will never maintain that feeling. There is no way to feel that low all the time. It will eventually change. It will eventually develop into something else. And I also want to say, reach out and find a therapist who understands grief and who doesn't fall asleep during the appointments. And
Or become one.
or
Okay, that was not. Don't.
But it's really,
yeah, my example was not a good one. But
it's really an interesting
It
thing. I think
is.
there's a lot of people who don't know the phases of grief. There's a lot of people who don't know and really push people to move past it. And I think just sitting with that pain in our office is not always easy, but it's critically important. And the more you do this work, you get more comfortable with it. So thank you.
I will
Kim,
say maybe
yeah.
the only thing that I would add is there's nothing lonelier than that feeling.
Yeah.
And just like the COVID slogan of like alone together, it really like there are other people that even just sitting next to them, not talking about your grief feels a little bit better than sitting alone in it. And you're not as alone as you think.
I just want to make a comment though about Talia, what you shared before. Like you are selfish about your grief.
Yeah.
You get to hold on to it though.
He's mine.
Right. And so when you talk about like, you know, it's okay to share it, et cetera, you also don't have
You
to.
also cannot.
I kind of dig that you said
I
that.
know.
You're
I
not
know.
selfish in that grief.
It's
I just
maybe an
really dig it.
unpopular-
And I know very much about this whole like, process, and we've talked
Yes.
about it a number of times.
Yes.
Kim, I can't even thank you enough. You know, one of the things that we talked about and joked about the minute you walked in, and you feel free to talk about the flowers that you're wearing today because it's significant. But I knew immediately we could go on to this conversation over and over and over, and there's more to cover. Life processing and life history review and existential questioning and faith and all these sorts of things. We could go on and on and on.
And I
Everybody
want
has their
to.
own experience. I do too.
You're incredible. Will you tell us who are here and everyone who's listening where they can find you? Say the names of your books again.
Yes.
We will have them. We will have them in our
Show
podcast
notes.
in the show notes. Thank
Yeah.
you.
thank you.
I knew that's what you were thinking
It
about.
was.
I read your mind.
We finish each other's
Sentences, sandwiches.
Sandwiches.
I don't know which one.
Sandwiches.
Okay, sandwiches.
Sandwiches.
Okay. Bro. Ice creams. Okay, go ahead.
Well, the book that I most recently wrote was called "Are You Ready? How to Build a Legacy to Die For." The first third is legacy building. The second
love that
third is
title.
death and dying. It goes about what people believe about death and dying, all different faiths. And then the last part is a workbook that goes over all the things you can do. You don't have to do any of this. You don't have to do anything really, but all the things you can do to make it easier for your family, to really set them up for emotional success. Because I've seen so many families falling apart after death when they're fighting over the money or fighting over whatever, grandma's pie plate, have that taken care of before you go. I just think that's really an important thing to do. I've also written 2 other books. One is Naomi and the Widows Club and the Naomi and the Widows Club workbook, which is going to be coming out in a couple of weeks. Those are Christian workbooks. Those are Christian devotionals that will give you a year. We hope that people get together and have a group that will go through it over a year, or you can go through it yourself. But it's basically to give some hope and healing to the people that have become widow or widowers. Male or female, doesn't matter. It's the same thing.
I love your titles.
Me too. Are you online anywhere? Do you have a website?
Well, I'm old. I do have a website. Actually, I have a website. I'm Twitter. What? I don't know.
I don't-
What that stuff is.
we don't
But,
Tweeter.
Twitter. I don't. But what I do have a website because I speak on grief and loss, so I do have a website, and it's drkimberlyharms.com, and there is a link to the book, the Legacy book. So
great.
there's a
Perfect.
link you can just drkimberlyharms.com, and there's a link you just one click to Amazon on the book, and you
Amazing.
can get the books on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or any online bookstore.
I'm in love. I mean, thank you so much. It's so powerful, and there's something like you bring that joy in your grief. It's a really unique and very special quality, and thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Well, thank you for having me. This has been a wonderful experience.
We want to open it up as well to everyone in the audience. If anybody wants to share their stories
I'm going to repeat it.
How do you
How do you justify the death of your child in God's plan? That's an amazing.
Thank you for that
You know,
question.
you don't. In my mind, and I have a very strong faith. I think that what has happened when Eric died, I think there's a plan for us. I think his was a temporary plan. What I can look back at now, at the time, it's just completely devastating. I want him back, but I would like to have him back. But I kind of think, as I look at life as being eternal, and this time on earth is just a mist, I really feel that I'm going to be with him for eternity. That's how I believe it. I'll be with him for eternity, and my son and my mother for eternity. What I can say is that since his death, his legacy is very large. We have 65 Eric Harms libraries in Rwanda that have really been a wonderful thing for me. I work through Books for Africa for that. So I've been able to work with the Rwandan grief counselors. You look at Rwanda, and they had a genocide. They had a genocide 30 years ago, I guess now. It's 1994. And they were my best grief counselors, because I thought, how could you be in a country where everybody in your family was murdered by your neighbors, and if they didn't murder you, they'd be murdered. So how do you live for a second with that? And they are joyful. The ones that I met are very joyful. They're wonderful, and they're very strong. They have a very strong faith. And they taught me that no matter what you're going through, you can, because I can't imagine a genocide. And you can't compare griefs, so I don't want to say, well, that's a worse, this is on a scale. I don't want to do that. But I saw that they could get through it. And when I went there, they hugged me and embraced me when they knew I had lost my one son. And they really helped me to just understand that there's a lot of stuff we don't know. But I'm living with my belief that God has a plan. I'm going to be rejoined with everybody. And so the end result in my faith is wonderful, because we're all going to be up in heaven together, and then he'll explain things. But it's a hard question, and I know it's hard for people to understand, and you need to have a faith. Yep. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to try to repeat that.
Yeah.
If at the end you find out that there's nothing, but you're conscious long enough to think about what you would do differently, should you do it over again? Is that right? Yes. What would you do?
I think it's a great question, because in my book, I talk about people that believe there's a percent, most people believe in a God, and there's a percentage that don't believe in a God. People have different views of what the afterlife is going to be, or no afterlife. I mean, we all believe differently, and it's fascinating. In fact, one of the fun things is to talk to everyone and ask what they believe, because it's very different. I think that if there is nothing there at the end, if we go to the end and find out, whoops, we were wrong, right? I was wrong about that. Then my belief about living a joyful life and leaving a legacy to my children and grandchildren, the people that I love, and our neighbors, which is everybody's our neighbor, and my belief is that my faith is based upon 2 commandments: love God, love people, right? So if you can pass along joy and love to the people that remain, then your legacy is you just help them get to that point too. So I think it's even more important, if you don't believe in an afterlife, to make the best of what you have right here now, because that's the only impact you're going to have forever.
That's
so
amazing.
And I really, I certainly understand the different. Everyone has a different faith, and I think, we are who we are, and we're shaped by our experiences. So, but it is a help for me, because in my faith really does help me through it.
I'll also share that one of the most frequent things I hear about people at memorials is the insensitivity of saying it's God's will that they lost their loved one.
Oh yeah, no.
I've heard that from so many people in the course of time, and know exactly your question, sir. It was a really great question. I'm glad you asked it.
I lost my son in March.
I'm sorry.
So sorry.
I'm so sorry. And
I'm glad you're here.
One of the things that people would say to me, and it was a suicide, was, Kim, God only gives you enough. He only gives you as much as you can bear. And I was like, well, then make me weak. And wait a minute, this was a suicide. Obviously, he couldn't bear it. So hello. And so people, it's the hardest thing in the world to lose a child. It's the hardest thing in the world, and you feel like your gut has been wrenched out. So you can't deny the difficulty, and everyone grieves differently.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry for your loss.
Sorry.
And it's obviously really recent. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the group?
Yeah.
You're in the right place. I'm glad you're here.
Yes, I'm so glad that you came, and that is so fresh. Oh,
Please keep coming to these events as well.
Well, it throws off, like you have a plan for your life. You think it's your plan. I mean, you think, right. You think you had a plan, right? And then all of a sudden it's completely destroyed because your plan involves your relationship with your children, right? And so it's completely destroyed.
Right.
And so I understand that the questioning. That's a
yeah.
very common question.
Thank you for
after that.
asking.
Thank you for sharing as well.
Does anyone else have a question they want to ask Dr. Kim?
Story to share, anything.
No one knows what to say, right? In case you couldn't hear, she says she understands why I would keep my grief to myself about my cousin, because sometimes people do say stupid stuff. But this is what I've realized is not, if I have decided nothing's going to sit right, nothing's going to land right, I almost don't want to share, because whatever someone says is already going to be the wrong thing. I already don't like what they're going to say. So I'm going to keep it to myself. But I will own that, yeah, people will say all sorts of stuff out of like they're trying to give love and share. And they're doing their best. And it's not like no one knows what to say. But I own that if I put it out there into the world, I made that a little vulnerable, and I can't be mad at people for trying, but
Sure you can.
I can. I tell you about it. And
I know you do.
And Rob knows all the time. I know one thing that might be helpful that I know Doug and I talk about with our people in therapy is the best gift you could give to yourself is communicate what you need from other people, because no one has any clue. I remember that I was talking to somebody and they were just like, I can't believe people keep looking at me and saying, wow, you've been through so much. Like, I hate people. Why do they keep saying that to me? And I'm like,
You're in the right
because
profession.
you have? I'm like, because you have been through so much, what should they say? And it was something that was like really similar, but with a different intonation. And I was like, oh, maybe you need to communicate that before you give them a chance to say the same thing. Dr. Kim, what do you think about that?
I was training dental offices on how to manage grief and suffering. And when you're in a dental office, like I know people for 30 years. I'd see them twice a year for 30 years, right? And when something like that would happen, they'd get divorced, and I would be treating their husband. So the first thing is you don't say anything bad about the husband because they might get back together. So you just keep quiet. But
we have to learn that too in our profession.
Keep your mouth shut. But what I did learn is when someone comes in, they lose a spouse, or they've gone through a divorce, or they had something else that causes grief, is for the front desk to say, "Oh, Mary, I'm so glad you're here," and just give them a hug, and then maybe I'm so sorry, and give them a hug. But recognize, I'm so glad you're here. Recognize that you're a human being, and I'm glad you're here. That's what we train them to do, and I think that's really has helped over the years.
I like it. What I really like about it is I think that what people fear the most is they're going to show up and everyone's going to have this look on their face of like, oh, like so sad, and nobody wants that face.
Yes.
And so even just like, I'm so glad to see you. I see you outside of the grief, and I'm also acknowledging your grief.
Sorry.
It's beautiful.
Anybody else? Nick?
You mentioned that after the end of the day of being a dentist no longer matters, and that our value or our purpose should be from within us. I'm curious if you have any techniques or ways that you might recommend that we develop that or bring that out in ourselves and kind of find our purpose within ourselves intrinsically.
And I think the best thing is you have to get the understanding that you're not your profession, or you're not what people see on the outside. You're a loving, kind human being, and because when you have a loss, especially, you falls apart. So kind of getting yourself together and feeling good about yourself, and then projecting that to other people. I think that's the important thing. And I think understanding that when you're that so often, like when with my husband, even my husband had a harder time than I did. So with my husband, he retired, and then people weren't handing him instruments anymore, and things were a little different,
Right.
And then he said, well, I think I want to go back to work, So he went back to work. And I think that you have to get to the point where you feel good about yourself, and you kind of establish your own purpose for whatever it is at the time. But just don't, your job is not who you are. And in our society, sometimes we feel that way.
We're socialized to believe that.
This is so tricky, though.
So-
I'm over here thinking two things, I will tell you. One is, Nick, the painting I purchased from you in my house, I look at every day.
That's his
And
legacy.
It's your legacy.
I do think it is. And I know my kids know how important that painting is to me. So I think it will live on way past
Yes.
me. I also probably, in a very egotistical and arrogant way and self-centered way, hope that the people that I have treated,
What?
I hope that the
Ask
people
his
who have,
ex-wife?
I hope the people that I've treated feel like I've made a difference. So even if
Yeah.
I'm gone, I hope I've made that difference.
Well,
But I
and
also
even
understand that
if they're not speaking it out loud, they will be living better and loving better.
Right.
And that affects everybody.
generations to come.
Right.
And I will tell you that these teeth are fake. And I love my dentist. So I
thought you were going to say
What?
That was
is
good.
that your teeth are going to outlive you by
They might.
thousands of years, and that's going to be
think
your
someone
legacy.
should take them out after. They're perfect.
They will.
And then Dr. Kim will paint them.
I could paint them. I could put a scene on there
Look
with
at
a little
those.
moon like that one.
I know.
But when I was at a school board meeting early on, and we were in some sort of an exercise where they say, what would you put on your tombstone? How do you want people to remember?
Epitaph, yeah.
And I was really young, it was before I realized a lot of stuff. And so my
You're
epitaph
exactly-
was, she may be gone, but her feelings live on. So that was my.
Oh, that's
so-
good.
Oh my gosh, I feel like a t-shirt for dentists.
These
She may be gone.
veneers.
Yes,
Yeah.
they're going to be there.
Like a dentist
Thank you,
at
Ned.
a funeral. That's
Yep.
I love it. Friends, we could not be more grateful. Thank you so much for being here. And I also wanted to say, this is what we usually do. This is the part we always botch without it in front of us. But if you got any value from this episode, please like us, subscribe. What else are we on? We have a website.
I think we're on TikTok.
We're on TikTok. We're on YouTube. We're not fine.
Yeah.
We're on
Instagram,
Dr.
Instacart.
Talia Jackson. Doug is on Instacart, and that's where he orders everything.
I do.
Douglas L. Jensen with an EN. Follow us. We're on Apple.
Spotify,
We're in,
YouTube, we're on the
everything.
tube.
We're not fine. Actually, yes. And sometimes we try to color coordinate our outfits. You should really watch us on YouTube, really.
And thank you again to Nick for hosting every 4 weeks or so.
Always.
We do this every month here.
you, Nick.
I can't thank you enough.
And thank you, crew and bartender.
Yeah, we couldn't do this
Evie.
without
We love you all.
those two gentlemen over there,
Woo!
Jeff and John. Also, one of the things we really love is when people come out of these with new topics or they are inspired by
yeah.
something. Please go to we'renotfine.com. We have a link where you can write anything to us that you'd like us to do in these live events or otherwise.
And now we have a newsletter. So on our website also, there's a place to give us your email because
And
some people aren't on
Patreon.
social.
I know.
Yes, so find us on there and you will become a part of just a monthly free newsletter. We also
Yeah.
have Patreon now. 'Cause
And we're trying to figure out how to text
cool.
everyone with events because we got
Yeah.
feedback that texting would be easier to just push a button.
But some people hate that. So yeah, we're open to feedback. But the Patreon starts at $0. And if you want to support us, it goes up to whatever. All sorts of fun, extra bonus things.
So
The
we
end.
thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you.